Welcome to the Inside Silverstone podcast, a business-focused podcast covering all things tech, engineering and innovation. Hosted by me, Chris Broome, a huge tech, motorsport and gaming fan, and also the owner of Longhurst, a firm of lifestyle financial planners and independent financial advisors located in Silverstone, Northamptonshire. This is a series of unscripted and unpolished conversations with leading business owners, thought leaders and high-tech talent where we discuss their experiences within the Silverstone business and motorsport region. We will also be asking them to share their knowledge, insight and their thoughts on the future just for you. If you're looking to learn more about the Silverstone high growth region and commercially connect with like-minded peers, you've definitely come to the right place. Welcome to Inside Silverstone. Welcome to the next edition of Inside Silverstone. My name's Chris Broome and I'm your host. Today I am delighted to welcome to the show Jon Hilton, who is Managing Director of Lunaz Design as well as an Ambassador for the Silverstone Technology Cluster. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
Jon, as is customary, as I always explain at the beginning, I'd love to do a very quick education and career background so our wonderful dear listeners around the world and locally can understand why we've asked you to come on the show. So is it okay if I do that?
Of course it is.
Fine. So as I also say, I always get this information off LinkedIn, so if any of this is sort of incorrect, please update me and perhaps even LinkedIn. Education-wise, a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Hertfordshire.
Yeah, that's right.
And career-wise, very exciting and fascinating career. So sort of early doors was an engineer designer for Rolls Royce for 7 years. And then, as I'll mention in a minute, you then had a really prolific, successful career in F1. So before we get on to sort of the F1 journey, Rolls Royce. World famous galactic name within the sort of automotive space. What was it like working there?
It was lovely actually. I was really lucky, I think, to land a first appointment there. Particularly, I was sponsored by them through my university course, so so they helped me cover my fees, which was great. And I went through their undergraduate apprenticeship scheme, so I did a whole year working in industry, mixed in with my studies, and then I came out of my apprenticeship to work in engine design, working on gas turbines for helicopters.
Wow!
So helicopter engine designer, and it was a great place to work, really, really high tech. But it was a bit tricky for a young person who was quite keen to get on because it was full of very, very clever people and a lot of quite old people,
right? And
it really felt like a sort of dead man's shoes place where there were not going to be so many promotion opportunities, and I was rather impatient, so I didn't last all that long. I was at Rolls about 7 years in total, but I left maybe before quite a few of my peers because I became impatient with the promotion prospects.
And this was during your 20s, so this would have been out of university,
yes.
Sort of 21-ish, and so your first real career. And entry level as such, but actually huge learning experience, helicopter engineer, which is clearly impressive, but just weren't getting ahead quick enough for your sort of appetite.
Yeah, exactly. I could see that around me that there were older apprentices than me, if you like, already in the workplace, already with several years of good experience under their belt, who were not getting the chances that I felt they deserved. And I could see that being me in a few years' time if I didn't do something about it.
Well, do something about it you did, because then shortly after that you joined Costworth Engineering, became chief engineer, overseeing F1.
Yeah, so I started there as an engine designer, designing small things, water pumps and oil pumps, and worked my way up to chief designer of the Formula One programme over a period of about 7 years, yeah.
So this would have been, you'd have been sort of...
Well, in the 90s, finished in 97.
Latter part of your 20s and then early 30s.
Yes.
What was that like?
So fantastic.
Early 30s, chief engineer at an F1 team.
Well, I remember my 32nd birthday, actually, and the first engine I was solely responsible for the design and development of won its first race on my 32nd birthday. And it was fantastic. It was genuinely life-changing, actually, to go from really believing you could do it to being absolutely certain you could do it because you'd done it in front of everybody, in front of the world. It was really lovely.
You're not the only person I've heard say that. So so episode 1 of this season, we had Chris Gorn, who's technical director at Virgin Formula E Racing, and he said exactly the same thing. It's one thing knowing, one thing thinking that you can design or build, but then to actually achieve it and do it, is just tick, tick, tick.
It is, and it's one of the things that I really try to give the opportunity to my young engineers to do for themselves, because if you don't let them build the thing they want and let them find out whether their version works, they never get to have that experience. And if you can let them make it their way, run it the way they wanted it, and it does work, then they will immediately blossom into this new person who knows how to do it.
Fantastic. So Cosworth for 6 years, and then you joined Arrows F1 as chief engineer. Again, that's obviously another local team. So Arrows were Milton Keynes based.
We were in Kidlington in the Station Field Industrial Estate site, but the team were at Leafield.
Yeah, fine. And then transitioned so you were there for 5 years, and then went to Renault F1, technical director, for 6 years. So what was it like at Renault?
Well, Renault was really interesting, and in fact the Renault and TWR experiences were linked, because I came to Renault with the whole of my engine team from Tom Walkinshaw Racing, and with the engines and all the drawings and everything for the engine we had built ourselves for the Arrows Formula One car, which presented us with a really unique opportunity to be at Renault with two very different engines, the one that the guys in France had built for Renault and the one we'd built in the UK for TWR. And they were so very different. The Renault engine made huge power, but had lots of friction, was really big and really heavy, and had a high heat rejection to water. Whereas the TWR engine was tiny, really light, 91 kilo V10, made almost exactly the same power on the dyno, but had a low indicated mean effective pressure and a low amount of friction. And so we spent several seasons putting all the good things from the TWR engine in the Renault. So the Renault got lighter, it reduced in friction, but we did our best to hold on to its high mean effective pressure. And this ended up giving us an engine that had the best of both worlds. It was sensibly small, sensibly light, low on friction, big on power, and then we won 2 world titles on the trot.
Because my next question was then going to be, because you've neatly led on to that, was so appreciating the race win on your 32nd birthday, but throughout your entire F1 career, what would you said would have been the sort of biggest highlight? Is it winning a championship? Or was it something else?
Yeah, for sure. Winning a championship is a lovely thing, and to be really clear, no one person on any of the teams wins the championship, not even Fernando Alonso.
Sure.
And the nicest thing of all, really, at Renault was that we had a wonderful team of people around us, all super bright, but really collaborative. And I could work really well with my opposite number on the chassis side, Bob Bell, in a really collaborative way, or with Tim Dencham, the car chief designer. Tim and I could sit down and say, well, we like this, or we don't like this, or we want to do so and so, and we could introduce things that would normally have straddled the boundary between car design and chassis design, and which had previously been quite difficult. So if you wanted to lower the weight of the engine, for example, to the advantage of the car, this was something that it was quite hard to do, actually, because the team, if you said to them, I want to take some people who would normally have been developing more power and put them instead on weight reduction, what's the trade-off between power and weight? And they would always say, more power is always faster. Yes, but how much better is it if I can lose 10 kilos? Oh, well, I haven't got you an exact number for that. Okay, well, look, we've got to agree some middle ground here, because clearly we have to do some performance development, but we also have to do some weight reduction because we're heavy. And, both of these things are going to be better for the car, and we have to agree between us some sensible balance of these attributes. And that's, that was, I think, where I did particularly well in striking a nice balance between all of the different things that were on the table to be done.
So you've mentioned Fernando. So what was it like working with the drivers? So what is that like working with an F1 driver?
Well, I think the driver's experience has always been quite interesting. I mean, when I was really young, on that car that won on my 32nd birthday, Keke Rosberg drove one of those Opel Calibra DTM cars that the engine was in. And I remember him coming back into the pits when he'd just run the new car for the first time. And I went over and said, I need to have a chat to you about this, because I really need you to change gear in a different place. And he gave me a really funny look. And and some little kid trying to tell him how to drive,
Yeah.
And I said, look, here's the graph. This is where you're changing. This is where I need you to change. It's going to feel like it goes rather flat, but just hold on and wait. It will be faster. And he looked quite sceptical, but he went out and he did the next flying lap just as I'd said, and he came back in and he said, okay, that was quicker. What else have you got?
Yeah,
and then you're away, aren't you?
Yeah. Just proved yourself.
Exactly.
So 2007, you sort of left Renault, or 2006 you left Renault.
Well, at end of 2006, actually, we won the title on the Sunday, and we all got fired on the following Friday. So the FIA homologated the engine, that is, they froze the design. So that job we did for a living, which was make it go faster next weekend, just disappeared. And not just for us, but for all the other teams too. And so we were left wondering what to do in an environment where applying for a similar job somewhere else just doesn't exist. And so me and my chief designer from Renault, we were sat in the pub actually with a redundancy check in our pocket saying, well, now what? So we had an idea to run our own business, which is what came next.
And so what was that business and what did you do? So
we started a company called Flybrid Automotive, working on high-speed flywheel-based kinetic energy recovery systems. So this is a technology for storing braking energy in the car and recovering it to drive the car back up to speed, which can either improve its performance or reduce fuel consumption. And I have to say, when we started, we were focused on racing applications, and our first client was the Honda Formula One team. But in fact, Honda pulled out of F1 before they ever got to race it. And we found ourselves in a position where we had this technology working, and the road car regulations were starting to bite with CO2 rules and targets for emission reduction. And so we managed to transition over to road car programs and start developing systems for the likes of Jaguar and Volvo. And then we moved on to develop systems for buses and trucks and diggers and all sorts of things.
And then several years later, so sort of 2014, what happened with the business?
Well, in 2014, we sold Flybrid to Toratrack PLC for a nice large sum of money. And I moved from running my own business to working for somebody else again, which was
what was that like?
An interesting transition. It wasn't particularly smooth.
Not often the case, that.
No, indeed. But basically, I worked 1 year for the new owner full time, then a year at half time, and a year for 2 days a month as a non-exec director. And then
you were gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's now 2019. So you're now managing director of a relatively new company called Lunaz Design, and you've got a beautiful, clean website. I like websites. There's a nice website, and on the very homepage there's a statement that says the future of classic is electric. So to our wonderful listeners who haven't heard of Lunaz Design yet, who are you, what do you do, and why is the future of classic electric?
So at Lunaz Design, we're taking beautiful old classic cars and converting them to full battery electric powertrains. And the concept is that we leave the car on the outside completely unmodified. So on the outside, it looks exactly the same as it did when it was a petrol-powered car. But under the skin, it's got a completely brand new battery electric powertrain that delivers all the performance you'd expect from electric, so exciting, brisk performance, a really good, usable, real-life range of 250 miles or so, and obviously, green, emission-free at the point of use, and tackling what is really quite a big concern for a lot of classic car owners, which their concerns are multifold, really. Firstly, how usable the cars really are in the real world. And we like to see people drive these cars. And the truth is, certainly the cars from the 50s and 60s, they're very, very difficult to use regularly because they are just really unreliable. They don't stand up to the rigours of modern driving, particularly traffic jams and things like that, in the way that modern cars do. and they are. You need some level of mechanical understanding to be able to run one as an everyday vehicle, because you will end up at the roadside fixing it. But also, their emissions are shockingly bad. They never did quote what the emissions at the tailpipe were, but they're 700 or 800 grams per kilometre. They're really dreadful.
Yeah.
And there is a really big question about whether you should be using as an everyday mode of transport something that emits quite so much CO2. That doesn't seem like a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we would love to see these cars in use. And already there are places where the use of petrol-powered classic cars is banned now. Centre of Paris, centre of Singapore, you now can't drive these cars. And we can see that being extended to other places in the fullness of time. So to keep them alive in this modern world, we think an electric conversion is a really nice solution that allows you to actually genuinely use it.
So what cars, was fantastic explanation, and thank you. It sounds very exciting. So what cars, presumably you're working on cars at the moment?
We are, and we're specifically not tackling only one marque.
Okay.
There are a lot of classic car places that do specialise in a particular brand of cars. We have set out from the beginning to be able to tackle all brands by developing a very modular electric powertrain system that we can fit to all sorts of different shape and size of car.
Okay.
So the first vehicle we've built is a Jaguar XK120 from 1953.
Okay.
The second car is a 1961 Rolls Royce Phantom 5, which is a huge 8-seater limousine.
Yeah.
The third car is a Rolls Royce Silver Cloud 1 from 56.
Nice.
But we have in our workshop at the moment Mercedes 190s and E-Type Jags, and we've been looking at Series 1 Range Rovers and all sorts of things.
Okay, and so let's go back to, let's use the Jag XK120 as an example. So that was, where did you find it? And what condition was it in? And what does that sort of thing cost? And then how long does it take to? Lots of questions in. And then how long does it take to develop that into something that's then potentially roadworthy and legal and safe? And
so our business at Lunaz, we only started on the 1st of January this year. We moved into our unit here on the Silverstone Park in the middle of February. So we've not been going all that long, and the Jaguar is driving around now on the roads here around Silverstone. So the conversion's relatively quick. We're expecting when we fully matured the process and we've done several different sorts, that we'll be down to something like 5 months for the conversion process. In terms of the car we're doing, the first car was actually my CEO's private car.
Okay.
So the first car we chose was his own one.
Yeah.
Which he really liked when it was a petrol car, and he was a bit reticent about conversion. But now it's done, he does really like the electric version, and he's really pleased with it.
Handy that.
It is handy. And it's not turned up to full performance yet either. He's going to really like it when we've finished. Generally you can buy these cars for something like £80,000 as a reasonable standard petrol car. And the conversion to electric, the way we do it, is very comprehensive, very well engineered, but also reasonably expensive. This car is going to be of the order of £350,000 plus taxes to purchase. But that's not only covering the purchase of the donor car and the cost of all of the components that go in it to convert it to battery electric, but also a full bare metal respray and full restoration of body, chassis, suspension, all new suspension joints, all new steering, power assisted steering, conversion to modern electric power assisted brakes, modern infotainment system, new instruments, because obviously our car doesn't have a gearbox to drive a speedo cable, so we've got to have all new instruments, although they are in the classic style. And if you look through the window, you'd see that beautiful stained walnut dashboard reminiscent of the original car. Very hard to tell actually if it was parked at the side of the road that it's not original.
What do they sound like?
So in full electric mode, they're very quiet. And when you're driving along, you can easily hold a conversation as we are now. You'd be able to do this in the car at 60 miles an hour. We have had comments from clients who think that maybe the absence of noise could be a problem. Our Jaguar does actually have noise generation, and so it can make a rumbly V8 noise if you'd like one. But whether clients will or won't take that option, it's up to them. We think you'll quickly get used to the quietness. And the noise of the electric drivetrain is quite nice, actually. It does make some noise. It is quiet, but the noise it makes is a speed-related whistle, if you like, and it's quite pleasant.
But moving forward, if people did want more of a noise, appreciating they might not be able to get the real authentic, how would that be? I'm just thinking from just a design perspective, that would just be some sort of speaker, that would be something that's being projected.
So we have two types of noise generation on the car. One is a stainless steel speaker connected to a fake exhaust pipe. And a second one is a vibration actuator glued to the inside of the bonnet that shakes the bonnet as if the engine were running.
Very clever.
And between these two, you can get an aural signature that is pretty similar to a regular petrol car with a running engine. The sort of thing I see that there was regulation passed this year about electric cars having to make a noise at low speed to avoid running people over.
Yes.
So we can meet that regulation using this technology. But also you can fully adjust the volume of the noise and the type of noise, and it's got a simulated 5-speed automatic gearbox. Actually, it puts gear changes in and everything for you.
Nice.
So but you can adjust all of that using an iPad.
And so you've used a really good word there, regulation. So from a sort of a standards perspective and a safety perspective, what exists within the world of converting a 1950s car into a sort of electric beast?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's a bit of a tricky area, to be honest, because the regulations are pretty sparse. There are not really any of any significance, which is a bit of a challenge for us. We are working to a similar standard as if we were building a brand new car. So we are working to ECE 100, a European Commission regulation that governs the design of electric cars. And this calls for all sorts of very sensible things like ground fault detection, like making sure you can't drive the car away when the charger's plugged in, and all sorts of other, very sensible. It calls for two methods of isolation on every battery compartment. We meet all of those rules, and we are building a car that would be approved if it had to go through an IVA test or an SVA test. But actually, it doesn't have to. All it has to do is pass an MOT, and it is a bit of a concern to us that there may be other less scrupulous operators out there, if you like, building cars that aren't really properly safe.
Oh, I see. So you think that could be a reality, that organisations out there might not be?
It certainly appears to be legally possible to build and run cars that don't meet ECE 100, and for us that would not be a sensible thing to do. So we shan't be doing it.
Yeah, no, of course. No, the opposite. You'll be proving and demonstrating that you are. Yes. Environmentally, critically important, I would suggest. And so what's the situation with comparing sort of CO2 positions sort of pre the conversion versus another type of electric vehicle, Tesla, for example, versus your conversion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. So I think, as I said earlier, the emissions of the standard car are terrible.
Right.
So obviously the converted car is so much better than its original petrol alternative, but there is some embedded CO2 in doing the conversion. You have to make the batteries and the boxes the batteries sit in and all the other new components we fit. So there is some embedded CO2 involved in doing that. That has to be recovered by driving around with zero emissions before you get back to a neutral position. And so if you look at how that works for regular cars, there's a really good report published by the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership here in the UK that looked at the whole life emissions of several different types of car. They looked at the embedded CO2 plus the in-use CO2 to drive 150,000 kilometres. And they reckon for a mid-sized saloon car, a petrol car is emitting something like 24 tonnes to build it and drive it 150,000 kilometres. Something like a Tesla Model S is about 17 tonnes, and we're about 12.5, and we're so low because we're not having to build a body or a chassis or the suspension or the wheels. You know, there is 2/3 of the car by weight or more that we're carrying over and not having to remanufacture. So this actually puts us in a really, really good place on CO2. And for what it's worth, with respect to a competitor like Tesla, our range is very similar. We've got a car that is pretty efficient. It's got a battery about as big as a base model Tesla. The car is lighter than a Tesla and it has a smaller frontal area than a Tesla. So, you know, at 60 mile an hour, it actually uses slightly less electric than they do. So it is actually really, really green.
And what about safety features? So from, you know, chassis through to obviously battery, high voltage. So how are you guys sort of managing that?
So we're building a car that is as safe as we reasonably can, but obviously it has some restrictions because it is based upon a car that was built in 53.
Sure.
So from the electrical side, we've got a supervisory controller that has ground fault detection, and it has a G sensor that measures for if the vehicle was involved in a crash, and it turns everything off. We have twin contactors on each side of every battery cell. We have battery temperature measurement, 190 odd temperature sensors all over the batteries, that any one of which can turn the system off if it sees something getting out of specification. So all of those electronic and electrical systems are really very safe. We also run a thing we call driven wheel ABS. So when the vehicle is braking heavily with regenerative braking, we monitor wheel speeds using our chassis controller to see if the rear axle is starting to under-rotate or lock up. And if we see that, we back off the regenerative braking until the rear tyres grip again to restore stability. So whilst the car doesn't have ABS, it does have modern disc brakes, full pot calipers and power assistance, and it does have driven wheel ABS, which at least mitigates the rear axle locking. But yeah, the car doesn't have airbags. They do have seat belts, so a 53 Jag doesn't have seat belts, and we have welded in suitably strong mounting points for those. So they are now fitted with inertia wheel seat belts.
And what about other sort of nice features? So I come in and say, okay, well, I want to, change the design of the leather as an example, or something else. I don't know. How bespoke can we make these?
So exterior paint, completely free choice.
Sure.
Interior trim, we would recommend a style of interior trim to you and give you a wide selection of choice of colours and materials. We actually have a lady working for us on interior design. She's been working part-time but starts full-time in January, who came to us from Aston Martin, and she was responsible there for the interior design of Aston Martin. So nice. This is the sort of standard that we're finishing the interior trim to.
Okay. Other questions I've got about Lunaz. DIY kits I've written down. So let's pretend for a moment there's companies online saying you could do this yourself.
Yeah, so
what are the risks?
You can find, if you went searching on YouTube, you'd find a number of people who have made their own electric cars one way or another. Most of them are taking second-hand parts from a crashed Tesla or something like that, stripping out the battery pack into modules and fitting these. There are people who will sell you forklift truck motors and things like this. So you could, for probably £30,000 or £40,000, build a kit of pieces that looks like it could do the job, but it wouldn't have any of the safety overview. No. You would be able to drive off when it was plugged into the charger. If you press the brake pedal and the throttle pedal at the same time, it would give you full power and full brakes, whereas ours only gives you brakes if you do that. And there's all sorts of things you could do that I wouldn't consider safe. And for sure, you would need quite a degree of electrical experience, because anything over 60 volts is really dangerous, and you do need to be really sure you've done this correctly.
Huge fire risks there. I mean,
yes, I mean, if you short these batteries, they can generate thousands of amps.
Yeah, battery out of a crashed Tesla, and
you don't know what the battery has done before, whether it had done 100,000 miles or whether it had been involved in a nasty accident. So you don't really know what you're getting.
how does the classic car world and enthusiasts, how are they taking this? Because presumably you've clearly spoken to them and engaging with them.
We have, and we've had visits from classic car clubs and things, and had people come to see us who were really quite sceptical when they came in the door.
Yeah.
But I would say to a man, they've left thinking we've done a proper job of the engineering, because the car is beautifully engineered, and appreciating what it is that we are trying to do. Now, we wouldn't say no if you brought to us the car that Clark Gable drove in some famous movie, but I guess that I think we're unlikely to get asked to do things like that. There will be certain ones of certain cars that are particularly famous, and it may be that they never get converted. Equally, there are cars like the Jaguar we started with, David's car, which already had the wrong engine in it. It had a 4.2 instead of a 3.8 in it. It had already been mucked about with to some extent. Taking that one and doing this conversion doesn't seem nearly so bad, even to the hardened enthusiast. And there are very, very many cars out there that have over the years lost track of their original parts, have been messed around with, or maybe were just painted some horrible shade of brown when they came out of the factory and therefore were never worth any real money. So there is a really enormous number of cars for us to choose from. And of course it makes sense, if we're building a Mercedes 190, to pick the model that had the least favoured engine in it, rather than the one that had the favourite engine that attracts the highest price. So there are a number of ways in which we can
complement.
Work with the lower value ones of the prestigious marks, if you like.
That makes sense. And who's the target market? So who's buying these? Presumably this isn't just the UK. I mean, I can imagine in the Middle East this is massive, and America and Russia and China. You mentioned China and Japan. These places, there must be wealthy individuals, not necessarily wealthy individuals, but people that are, or institutions or organisations that would look at this and go, actually, for our business or otherwise. This
exactly that. And so obviously high net worth individuals is one key market, and these might be surprisingly young people. And in fact, our youngest investor is 29, and the oldest is 32. So our core group of investors are young people by my standard. And they've got a real fascination with these cars that isn't the same as the people who remember them from their youth. My father had one of those, or I had one of those when I was a kid. This is not that thing at all. This is wow, that's beautiful. That's really electric. Fantastic. And sometimes, and what is it? Don't even know what it is actually. Just think it's beautiful. But also, we're receiving orders from elderly people who did have one of these when they were a child, or where their father had one, and so it really is across the whole range of private individuals. But also we're getting a lot of corporate interest, and particularly the Rolls Royce, Bentley, the limousine type cars. We see these as being the chauffeur-driven car that sits outside a really smart hotel. And again, one of our investors owns a big London hotel, and we're well connected with the hotel market. So we can see, fleets of the limousines being ordered by some of the big hotel chains.
Exciting stuff. And launched in January.
Yes.
Not even a year old.
Nope.
Got orders, got people knocking at the door saying, we're interested.
We have, and we only did our first proper publicity about a month ago, and I think in the first day you had 19 inquiries or so for cars with the price stated in the publicity, knowing exactly how much these cars cost. We were really pleased.
Sort of Field of Dreams moment, right? Build it and they will come.
Yeah.
So we're recording this interview in the Innovation Centre, which is slap bang in the middle of Silverstone Park. You are an ambassador to the Silverstone Technology Cluster.
Yes.
And my business, Longhurst, is a member firm there. Talk to us about the STC. Why did you become an ambassador for the STC? And how do you think that your personal career experiences and what you're doing with Lunaz can help fellow STC firms sort of focus on growth and removing restrictions that may sort of exist mentally, perhaps, let alone sort of physically?
Yeah, so I think the STC is a really good idea. And so one thing we haven't mentioned, so in 2016-17, I was president of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers.
Of course, yeah.
And I've been working with the IMechE as a volunteer for years and years and years. Been a member since I was a student and a fellow since 2002. And that's a volunteering organisation which is helping to promote engineering in the community, around schools and try and get new young people into this as a career, but also helping with the personal development of engineers who are out in the workplace, delivering training materials and evening lecture opportunities and all sorts of ways to expand your knowledge and keep you getting better every year. And I see the STC as another way to do a similar sort of activity. For me, it's about sharing life's experiences and helping everybody else in the group to get bigger and better. It's entirely philanthropic from my point of view. I'd love to see them all be successful. I'd love to see this area grow, create more jobs. My son's 17 and fancies a job in engineering, and I'd like there to be lots of choice for him. And so if I can, share my experiences of high-level motorsport and of building and selling my own business with other members of the group, I'm really happy to do that. And from the growth perspective you mentioned in particular, so I think it's often quite difficult for the small businesses to think, almost difficult for them to think big enough. And I'd like to really encourage the people who run their companies in this area to just try and let their mind off the leash and think just about how crazy big it could be if they really were to think that way. And actually, almost if money were not a problem in growth, if you just took the money thing off the table, now what it would it look like? And if that does enable you to think about a much bigger business and get a picture of what that looks like, then go back and work out how to find the money. Because if the vision's that good and that big, you'll get the money. But very often it seems to me the lack of money stops you even looking, stops you even thinking big enough. And so I'd really encourage companies to try and think outside the box is a horrible phrase, isn't it? But just think really big and let that view of big sink in, and then try and go big again, and let that sink in and try and go big again, and until you get to as big as it could possibly be. And then work out also how expensive would it actually be to do this thing that I've now got in my head. I'm going to multiply the size of my business by 10, by 100. How hard is that actually? Now I've got a picture in my mind of what it would look like. Are there things I could do that would smooth my transition from where I am to there?
And presumably you're clearly practicing what you preach at Lunaz. So what are the hopes with Lunaz as a business and growth? And if I sort of consider the future of vehicles and their production, could you ever see a time in the future where that they're no longer produced, and so a business like yours and where you're adapting and converting cars into something that's more economical and more friendly on the environment becomes law?
Well, I think becomes law is a big stretch, but I think the principle of buying good quality things and making them last a lifetime is a really good one. And I like my Churchy shoes made in Northampton, and I can have them resoled and relaced, and they look like new when they come back. And this is a model for life in some ways in this new environmentally conscious world in which we live. And so we do say about our Rolls Royce cars, it's a car for life. It's already 60 years old. We see no reason at all why it won't do another 60, another 120. If a component breaks on the car that was not of our design, one of the original Rolls Royce pieces, a front upright or a steering column or something, well, if we can't buy one, we'll make one. We can make anything. There is no reason at all why we can't keep these cars alive literally forever. And that would be hugely more green than continuing to pour CO2, if you like, into the embedded CO2 of new cars. In fact, it's quite a challenge to see how changing from a current petrol car to a new electric car, a fully newly built electric car, would actually be a very green thing to do at all. You know, the marginal saving in CO2 isn't very big. You move from 24 tonnes to 17, but you had to embed 8 and a bit tonnes of new CO2 in this new car in order to make this transition. It's not hugely green, that. It's actually a really interesting challenge, and I certainly could see you keeping alive the better quality cars, if you like, and topping up the pool of better quality cars until you had enough to satisfy everybody's demand without making any more new ones. That'd be a lovely place to get to.
Jon, thank you. Fascinating, lots and lots of information, and hopefully some wise snippets there for our wonderful listeners to take on board. I think I'm going to start winding the interview down because we're nearly at 40 minutes.
Sure.
Hasn't that gone quickly? So last 3 questions are anything I haven't asked. So whilst we've been chatting, anything fired off, let's talk about that.
Well, I think a bit. I wouldn't mind saying a bit about IMECI. Yes, it's my favourite charity. You know, I've given a lot of time and effort to them over the years. I'm fully supportive of the principle of engineers doing their bit for society. And it is a charity. It's not a membership organisation. It does good by promoting the world of engineering, trying to encourage more young people into this business. And we need those people coming through to help all our businesses thrive. I'd encourage membership of IMECI and for the businesses around here to support their employees in joining. So
in the show notes we can leave a link, hyperlink to the website, so you can provide me that, and obviously we'll put Lunaz on there as well, plus anything else that you want to sort of direct people certainly to get in contact with you
thanks very much.
Or otherwise. Second from last question, embarrassing mistakes. So I don't know if you have an embarrassing mistake, but there's a fascinating story that isn't embarrassing, but it's just fascinating, that I think actually we should just talk about this instead. Okay. So talk to me about alpaca farming.
So yes, I alongside my job at TWR Arrows and at Renault, I ran an alpaca farm from 1999 through till 2013, and we had I think 167 alpaca. Wow! So quite a big alpaca farm. And
why?
Well, I had 5 acres of grass around the house I didn't want to have to mow, is the short answer.
There we go.
But the longer answer is that this was also an opportunity for me to expand my knowledge outside engineering into the wider world of business. And had I not done that, Flybrid would have been greatly more difficult, because it did give me exposure to writing adverts, telephone sales, contracts, VAT, accounting, and all those things you need to do in a business that are not really the remit of the engineers. But you do need to know when you come out of a big company like Renault to start your own enterprise. And so it was tremendously useful in that respect. I have to say I haven't used the ability to deliver a breech baby alpaca since I sold them, but still, you know, it's an interesting thing to have been involved with.
And as you said earlier, as well as having a degree in mechanical engineering, you now also have a degree in alpaca farming.
Indeed, yes.
Fantastic. Last question, which is in part because we know we've got students listening from a number of sort of colleges and tech colleges in the region, which is cool. So let's take you back to, you've just finished your degree at the University of Hertfordshire, where obviously you've been doing some work placements with Rolls Royce, but taking yourself back there, what sort of biggest bit of life advice, bit of wisdom would you have passed on to yourself then?
Well, I think the key thing, I guess, is that I think everybody should keep learning for the whole of their life, and that I have been back to the University of Hertfordshire and they asked me how much of what you learnt in your degree do you still use every day, and I said, well, basically, all of it and so much more. In fact, I think it's like getting an extra degree for every 5 years of work experience in business finance, in how the city works with raising money, in business administration, in health and safety, or whatever else it is you've been working on in the last year. So I also think maybe I would have advised myself to be a bit more patient in those early years. I said I was quite impatient at Rolls Royce to get on, and maybe it was helpful and maybe I was unreasonable. You do have to remember there is no substitute for experience, and the people who've been around and seen a lot of things can do things that young people just can't do. And sometimes you just have to wait for those years to accumulate and see more stuff before you can do the bigger, more complicated jobs. But I think the key lesson is you just need to keep learning. As long as you feel that you are moving forward every year, learning something new and getting better every day, then you should be happy.
Jon, Lunaz Design, thank you so much for coming on the show. As I said, I'll put some links in the show notes, so for Lunaz, as well as any other organisation or institution you've spoken about, so people can find those. And clearly, if anyone listening to this wants to get in contact with Jon to talk about potentially a project on any car or anything else, then please do so. Jon, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
The Inside Silverstone podcast is produced by the team at Longhurst for the benefit of those with a passion for all things tech, engineering and innovation. For more information, please visit longhurst.co.uk/Inside Silverstone, whilst also remembering to give us a 5 out of 5 star rating on iTunes. Please note that neither Chris Broome or Longhurst work for Silverstone Park, Silverstone Circuit or Silverstone Technology Cluster.